We have major breaking news coming out of Ukraine, friends. The Zaporizhia nuclear power plant has caught fire and is now currently burning. Now, right now, from images that we're seeing out there, video images that have just been released, it looks like one of the cooling towers of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant is on fire. This is as we have a major raid into Kursk as the Ukrainian forces are apparently closing in on the Kursk nuclear power plant inside Russia. The Zaporizhia nuclear power plant inside Ukraine is on fire. Now that is under Russian control there, but apparently there has been shelling. The Ukrainian side is apparently accusing the Russians of burning tires within the cooling tower. I don't know why in the world they would want to do that. That really doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We got that. We got Belarus mobilizing troops against the Ukrainian border. We got to talk about that too. Iranian ballistic missiles now being used against Ukraine. Friends, there is major stuff going down in Ukraine right now. Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Poplar Report. I'm Steve Poplar. I'm an accountant by trade, and we're covering the news that is breaking out there and trying to give you guys the unbiased opinion there. A lot of the stuff coming out of Ukraine in the mainstream media is being told only from the Ukrainian propaganda side of things, and you got to take everything that they say with a grain of salt. They're losing a major war, and they're not exactly being open and honest about a lot of stuff going on. So let's fact check some of this stuff and also give you kind of like a gut check on like, does that even make sense? All right, so we have one of the cooling towers of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant on fire. I'm going to say that I think that the Russian side of this makes more sense, that the Ukrainians started shelling the plant in order to potentially trigger a fire like this, or to make the Russians look bad so that they can then potentially scuttle the nuclear power plant in Kursk. So I don't know. This is not something that the Ukrainians haven't done before. They have repeatedly shelled the power plant again and again and again. They tried raiding the power plant in order to sabotage it, potentially, in order to pin that on the Russians. You got to understand, Ukraine has been invaded. They are not doing well. And even though they're getting lots of weapons and munitions from the United States and other U.S. allies, the NATO weapon tree is made for maneuver warfare. You know, you're supposed to be like lightning fast invading a country and breaking through their lines and maneuvering tanks all around the battlefield. And whereas that's not what we're seeing in Ukraine, right? We're seeing like they're digging in and then just pounding each other with artillery. This is the Russian Soviet method of warfare. So we're giving them munitions and weapons and tanks and vehicles that are designed for a certain type of strategy and maneuver warfare. And the Russians are just sending lots of artillery shells and just pounding the Ukrainians into dust. And it's not going well. It's not going well. In a war of attrition, the Russians have more soldiers. They have more population, all that. So things are not going well. The Russians are slowly grinding forward. So does it make sense that that Ukraine tries to break out and go into maneuver warfare? It seems like that's not the worst idea ever, but there are some serious problems with this. They've punched across the border into Russia, into Kursk region, and apparently they are trying to maneuver into a position to attack the Kursk nuclear power plant, which is a big concern for, I don't know, the world. And they're punching into Russian territory, which is dangerous. Like really, really dangerous. Why? Because when you invade with a relatively small force, it's relatively easy for them to encircle you. Now, Russians are not as good at maneuver warfare, so maybe this will play to their advantage, but the problem is that they're encircled by surface-to-air missiles, so they're not going to be able to get good air support in there. So this is looking more and more like a giant PR stunt or a PR raid in order to boost the morale of the Ukrainians, which is something necessary right now. Also make the European allies, the United States ally, feel much better about the investment that they're making. But they've committed over a brigade of crack soldiers. There's some concern that there may be a high foreigner content of this group as well. Are some of these NATO troops, or more likely, I'm going to say it's probably more likely that these are foreign volunteers. So basically either former soldiers or just, Polish people, French people that are like, they believe in the mission and they volunteered. So there's lots of volunteer units like this. Now, the numbers are relatively small, but there have been some, according to the Russians, foreigners that have been caught that are not Ukrainian. But there is that potential that at the core of this invasion into Russia, what if there are foreign troops in there? That's a concern. I say that that's relatively unlikely, especially because this is basically a suicide mission. There's really not much you can really say to convince me otherwise. They're going to get cut off, and when they get cut off, where are they going to get fuel from? Where are they going to get ammunition from? They're probably going to get cut off, encircled, and then either the Russians are going to overwhelm them or just pound them with artillery. So how does that end well? They're going to lose a whole brigade. Yeah, the Russians are suffering casualties. Yeah, the Russians have had to evacuate 100,000 plus civilians from the area, demoralizing for the Russians. But on the other side of things, the Russians are like, we need soldiers to go fight in Ukraine. And more and more Russians are just like, I don't want to invade Ukraine. Like, why do I want to invade Ukraine? But now that Ukraine has invaded Russia in a very public way, and many, many people are being pushed out, I imagine you're probably going to see a whole bunch of Russians suddenly patriotically volunteering. And that's counter to the purpose of the Ukrainians, right? So I'm not thinking this is a great thing. Now, I'm flipping it both sides, right? Flip it back to the Ukrainian side and say, one thing that they did do, which was pretty devastating, that just punched Russia right in the face, is as they did their incursion, they then, the Russians were like, okay, well, we need to get stuff over there. We need to get tanks and everything like that. So they loaded their tanks up on trucks. And they're going to drive them close, right? So they formed a convoy to start going in to go respond to this, right? And Ukraine spotted them on satellite and pow, 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 pow. Hit them with missiles. Just destroyed the whole convoy. Which, if that's what you're trying to do, is go into maneuver warfare, force the enemy to turn into convoys, and then hit them with airstrikes or missile strikes where you're just devastating the convoy because you got them out in the open. That's a pretty good strategy. I don't think that they're doing this en masse or large scale, but they did do it at least once because that has been documented. And so that's good. But I'm going to get back to this whole but is that a good thing? Ukraine is trying to get everybody in the world to feel bad for them, to view them as being able to fight this war. And so there's a lot of people out there cheering that they're going into Russia. But we have to remember something. The country with the most nuclear weapons in the entire world is Russia. Now, if you're trying to provoke them into a nuclear Armageddon, this is probably a good method. I mean, you're doing, that's what you do if you're trying to provoke them into a nuclear strike. And that may be what Ukraine is really ultimately trying to do, is provoke Russia into launching a nuclear weapon, using a tactical nuclear weapon against Ukraine. And they may do that. That may happen. And once that threshold of the nuclear weapon is used, that's going to change things. I mean, how do you back down from that? What's the West going to do? Is the United States just going to sit there and go, oh, okay, they did that, so that happened? Or is the United States going to be forced to respond? Is Europe going to be forced to respond? And like I said, Belarus apparently shot down over a dozen Ukrainian drones over Belarus. And because of that, Belarus has mobilized its military and is deploying its troops on the northern border of Ukraine. Remember that Russia came through Ukraine, through Belarus into Ukraine back at the beginning of the war. Since then, Belarus has basically stepped back and said, like, we're kind of neutral here. We're not really on Russia's side. I mean, we support them and that kind of stuff, but we're not going to let them attack you through us so much. And in return, you got to leave us alone. Well, Ukrainian drones crossing the border and getting engaged with Belarus air defense systems has Belarus reacting. Now, is this true? Is Belarus just lying and making that up? That's possible. I wouldn't put it past them, right? So many of the reports we're seeing out there are either deceptions, propaganda pieces. So stuff that Russia's putting out, stuff that Belarus is putting out, it's all suspect. And that's why I was hesitant about reporting on these things earlier, because quite frankly, we don't really know what's going on there. We can read between the lines, we can guess, we can say this makes sense, that doesn't make sense, whatever. But here's the fact, is that Belarus is using this incident, whether it's real or not, to deploy troops against the Ukrainian border. And if you think about Russia getting suddenly desperate, what's one of the things they're going to do? They're going to pick up the phone and say, hey, Belarus, we need you to help us. And Belarus is going to say, well, what do you want us to do? You want us to deploy troops to help you directly? Or one thing that we can do is we can deploy our troops right up against the Ukrainian border and freak the Ukrainians out. That's something that Belarus can do without actually committing its troops, without becoming an active hostile combatant. They can deploy their troops up against the Ukrainian border and threaten to invade, and Ukraine's going to be forced to move troops over there. And by moving troops over there, it's going to weaken their entire defensive line. So that's something we may be seeing right now, or this may not be a bluff at all. Russia may have picked up the phone and said, Belarus, gloves come off. Could you please go into Western Ukraine? And if they invade Western Ukraine, they're not going to see much defenses. They're not going to find much resistance. They're going to be going in basically unopposed right through Ukraine's supply lines. And Poland will lose its frickin' mind. Poland, the United States, other European allies will lose their minds if that happens. You'll hear a cry go up from around the world. So we got, I don't know how this is going to go down next, but pieces are moving. And now we see this fire at Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. What happens next from that? Remember that they were having issues because they didn't have the water in their reservoir, and that they would have to pump water up out of the river in order to get it into the power plant because of the dam breaking, right? The dam coming under attack that the Ukrainians attacked and then tried blaming on the Russians. That's, one thing after the next, right? But the fact that they're having trouble getting enough water in there to cool the stored nuclear waste, I don't think they need to have one of their cooling towers on fire. I don't think that's going to help the situation. And the artillery, if artillery was hitting the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, The cooling tower may be on fire, but what else has been damaged? Has other things been damaged? Have other things caught on fire? We don't know. We don't know at this time, and this is at the same time that the Ukrainians are closing on the Kursk nuclear power plant. Friends, we're going to need to stay on this one. I'm going to give you updates as best I can to keep you informed on what's going on out there. But we're going to keep our eye on Belarus and their military deployment. We're going to keep our eye on the Kursk nuclear power plant. We're going to keep our eye on the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Hope they get this fire out and they get things under control, because that is a major nuclear power plant. We do not need that going critical. And then there's also news out there that the Iranians apparently sold a whole bunch of short-range ballistic missiles to Russia, and apparently they've already started using a few of these. So that's also a big deal. They used a North Korean ballistic missile, but then the Iranians also were selling ballistic missiles to Russia. So Iran and North Korea selling these ballistic missiles to Russia, and there is forensics going on right now on the one suspected North Korean ballistic missile. If they identify that as directly tied to North Korea, that's going to be a whole nother diplomatic whatever, okay? So lots of stuff happening. We'll keep you updated. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to check out another video from this channel, there's one right up here. I'll see you over there, or I'll see you guys later. Steve Poplar of the Poplar Report, out.